The alarm came at 03:14, and I was already awake. Waystation 14 runs on a skeleton crew between freight rotations, and during the quiet stretches, I tend to stay at my desk long past the shift change, updating extraction logs or running compliance checks on the station's emergency kit inventory. That night, I had been working through a backlog of sub-level access reports, routine maintenance notation that nobody else wanted to read, when the evacuation tone cut through the corridor and the red panel above my door went solid. I already knew what it was. The sublevel B coolant seal fault had been flagged in 2 consecutive maintenance reports over the previous 10 days, and both times the work order had been rescheduled. I had noted it. I had written the notation into my SAR weekly summary and sent it upward. The summary had been acknowledged and filed. These things happen on a way station that processes 47 freight loads per week with a maintenance crew of 8. I pulled up the station map on my terminal. Sublevel B was already showing blue water intrusion from the reserve feed pipe that ran under the platform's northwest ice shelf anchor. The coolant seal failure had let the meltwater in. At this time of year, the shelf melt rate ran at approximately 11 liters per minute through a breach of this size. Sublevel B had a volume of roughly 400 cubic meters. I did the arithmetic while I was pulling on my gear. The evacuation log on my secondary screen showed 31 personnel accounted for, evacuated to the upper level. The manifest showed 39 personnel aboard tonight, including a transit group of 8 Velshoran passengers, 4 adult women and 4 children, who had come aboard 6 hours ago on a connecting freight shuttle and were berthed in the sublevel B passenger hold while they waited for their onward routing. I stopped pulling on my gear and read that again. Velshoran, 4 adult women and 4 children, sublevel B passenger hold. I went to the station species database. I had worked SAR for 19 years across 9 postings, and I had encountered Velshoran passengers before, but never in an emergency thermal context, and I had a habit, one that had kept me, and the people I pulled out alive for 19 years, of reading the full species brief before I descended into anything. The brief for most species ran about 4 pages. The Velshoran brief ran 14. I read all 14. By the time I finished, the water in sublevel B was at approximately 31 centimeters and rising. I had 7 minutes before it reached the passenger hold's lower ventilation grill, which would begin forcing cold air directly into the hold at an accelerated rate. I had somewhere between 40 minutes and 2 hours before the temperature in that hold reached the threshold where Velshoran physiology began to fail, and the threshold was not the same as it would be for a human. It was higher, significantly higher. The Velshoran brief explained why in clinical detail. Their core temperature regulation depended on a secondary vascular exchange system concentrated in the upper back and the base of the neck, and that system shut down progressively under cold exposure in a way that standard compact hypothermia protocol did not address. Standard protocol would have kept them comfortable by human assessment, while their secondary exchange system was already in cascade failure. The brief also described the warming reversal technique specific to the species. It was not complicated. It required specific positioning, sustained thermal contact at the upper back, and a particular rate of warming that was slower than human intuition suggested. The brief noted, in a footnote I very nearly skimmed past, that the technique had to be administered by direct physical contact. No thermal blanket alone would produce the correct warming gradient. The brief further noted, in a second footnote near the end of the document, that sustained physical life support of this kind, administered by a non-Velshoran individual to 4 or more Velshoran adults in a single emergency event, activated a designation under Velshoran Civil Code that the brief did not have space to explain in full, and directed the reader to compact Cultural Liaison Document 7 VKS for details. I did not read Document 7 VKS. I made a note to read it later, grabbed my kit and went down. The access stairwell to sublevel B was dry to the fourth landing. Below that, the water was at my shins and cold enough to make my boots feel thin. I had packed for this. Insulated waders to the hip, 2 emergency thermal packs rated for Velshoran physiological range. I had found 2 in the kit closet and added 4 standard packs re-rigged with additional backing layers to approximate the required gradient. A length of rescue line, a handheld light, and the fold-out medical reference card from the species brief, which I had printed in the 2 minutes between finishing the document and going down the stairs. The passenger hold door was above the waterline. I knocked before opening it, which is something I do from habit. It gives people time to move back if they can, and it tells them someone is coming who is not the water. The door opened from the inside before I finished knocking. The woman who opened it was tall, silver-haired, with pale blue-toned skin and amber eyes that were bright despite everything. She had a child pressed against her side, a girl of about 7 or 8, gray-violet skin, white hair loose around her face, and her expression when she saw me was not relief exactly. It was the particular focused steadiness of a person who has been managing a bad situation and has now identified the variable that changes it. "Rescue protocol," I said. "My name is Kale Vren, SAR coordinator. I need everyone to come with me, single file, in the order I specify. Do you speak standard?" "I speak standard," she said. "We all do. There are 8 of us." "I know. I'm going to bring you out 1 or 2 at a time through the access tunnel to the north stairwell, which is dry. The water outside this door is at shin height and cold. I need to know if any of the children are unable to walk." She looked back into the hold for a moment. "Soul cannot walk in cold water. She is small." "Tell me which one is Soul, and I'll carry her." I carried Soul on my back through the shin-deep water to the stairwell. She was perhaps 3 years old, lavender skin, silver hair, and she held onto the back of my neck with both hands without being told to, which suggested she was a child who understood that holding on was the correct response to a situation like this. I brought the woman who had opened the door, her name was Rael, with us on the first crossing, her hand on my shoulder through the water because the footing on the sublevel B floor was uneven, and I had the light. On the second crossing, I brought Sorit and her daughter, a child of about 5 named Vel who walked the water herself with her jaw set and did not make a sound. On the third crossing, I brought Kethael, who was carrying an infant strapped to her front in a wrap, and her older child, a boy of about 6 named Dav who waded with the focused determination of someone who has decided to treat the cold water as a personal opponent and is winning. Kethael did not speak on the crossing. She watched the water, watched the light, watched her infant's face in that order continuously. On the fourth crossing, I brought Davin, who was the last. She was the youngest of the 4 women, I thought, though Velshoran ages are not easy to read by appearance. She had mint-green skin and pale copper eyes, and she had been the one holding the space at the back of the hold, the position that kept the warmest air around the others. She had given up her own warmth management to give it to them. I noted this because it was information about who she was, and knowing who people are matters in a SAR event. I got all 8 of them to the north stairwell landing. And then I looked at them properly and understood what the species brief had been telling me. They were cold. By human assessment, they would have seemed cold but manageable. No visible shivering beyond what you would expect, eyes open, all of them responsive. But the brief had told me what to look for if you knew the Velshoran secondary vascular system was under stress, a particular stillness in the upper body, a slight forward lean as the body instinctively tried to protect the neck region, and a quality in the eyes that was not quite normal alertness, sharper in some ways, slower in others, like a system running on reserve. All 4 women had it. The children were warmer. The women had given their heat to the children. That was the order of things here. I set down my kit on the stairwell landing and explained what I was going to do. The Velshoran physiological brief describes a cold exposure response specific to your species, I said. Your secondary vascular exchange system requires a specific warming sequence that standard thermal blankets won't address adequately. I need to apply direct thermal contact to the upper back region for each of you, in sequence, while the children are wrapped and stable. I'm going to ask your permission individually before I touch any of you. You can refuse and I'll work with what I have, but I want to tell you clearly that the standard protocol I would otherwise use is not sufficient for your physiology. Rael looked at me for a moment. You read the brief, she said. I read the brief. All 14 pages. Yes. She said something in Velshoran to the others. I don't speak Velshoran, but the register was not a question. It was an information transfer. She was telling them something that was already resolved. You may proceed, she said. I worked through the sequence the brief described. The children first, wrapped, positioned, thermal packs applied at the correct contact points, temperatures checked at intervals. The infant, whose name I did not learn until later, she was called Ren, slept through most of it once her temperature began to stabilize, which the brief told me was normal and not a concern. Dav sat against the stairwell wall with a thermal blanket around his shoulders and watched me work with the exact expression of a child who is filing everything for later use. Then the women, one at a time. I will not describe this in detail because it is not the kind of thing that needs detail. The brief was precise and I followed it precisely. Thermal contact at the upper back, just below the base of the neck, at a sustained pressure the brief specified. A slow, deliberate warming rate using the layered packs I had rigged. Position maintained for the interval the brief prescribed. Monitoring of the visual indicators the brief had taught me to read. I asked each woman's permission before I began. Rael, then Sarit, then Kethael, who kept the infant in her arms throughout, and whose warming I had to adjust slightly to account for the positioning. Then Daven, who was the coldest of them all by the time I reached her, and who needed the longest interval. 6 hours from the time I first went down the stairwell, all 4 women and all 4 children were stable, warming at an appropriate rate, and no longer in the zone the brief had flagged as dangerous. Between the women's warming intervals, I checked the children again. Sol had fallen asleep against the stairwell wall, which was a good sign. Her temperature was stable, and her secondary vascular indicators, per the brief, showed appropriate color return at the neck. Vel was awake and watching her mother's warming sequence with sharp interest, asking no questions, which I suspected was not her default behavior, and was instead a decision she had made about this particular situation. Dav had graduated from watching me to asking, in a low voice that would not disturb anyone, precise and sequential questions about the kit components. I answered them the same way he asked, precisely, without condescension, in the correct technical terms. By the third question, I understood that he retained everything on the first pass and was not asking for repetition, but for the next layer of information. I gave him the next layer. Ren slept the entire time. She had a thermal pack across her back and her mother's arms around her, and the corridor's emergency lighting casting a soft amber above them. And she slept the way an infant sleeps when her system has decided the immediate crisis is handled, and she is returning to the primary business of being an infant, which is sleep. Daven's warming interval was the longest. The brief had been specific about cold exposure accumulation in the dorsal vascular exchange tissue, and she had been the warmest position in the hold for 6 hours, which meant she had been the coldest when I reached her. I worked the protocol at the correct rate and did not rush it. She did not speak during the interval. Neither did I. There is a kind of silence that belongs to the work, the focused, attending quiet of doing a thing carefully and correctly, and she was in it with me, which is not nothing. At one point, perhaps 40 minutes into her interval, she said, very quietly and not really to me, "You are still here." "I'm still here," I said. She did not say anything else for a while. "Then you have been here for 5 hours. 5.5, I said. "The log will show the exact times." "You are alone," she said. "You came down alone." "The rest of the crew was evacuated to the upper level," I said. It was faster alone. She was quiet again. I continued the warming sequence. The brief said to watch for a specific change in the upper back tissue, a shift in the muscle density as the secondary vascular exchange system came back online, which I had learned to feel by the third woman and could now identify reliably. With Davin, it came at 51 minutes, and I held the contact for the additional 7 minutes the brief prescribed before stepping back. Temperature is stable, I said. You're in range. She exhaled slowly. It was the first time since I had found her that she had let her breath do anything other than stay controlled, and even, which told me how much of her attention had gone to keeping that control in place. I sat on the stairwell step above Davin and wrote up my incident log. Rail watched me write for a moment. You are thorough, she said. The log is how the next person knows what happened, I said. If there's a next time, the record should be accurate. She was quiet for a moment. There will not be a next time, she said. Not like this. I took that as a reference to the station's maintenance failure. The seal fault will be repaired, I agreed. She did not say anything else, and I did not ask what she meant. The medical annex team arrived at 0940, 6 hours and 26 minutes after the alarm. They were efficient and thorough, and they confirmed that all 8 passengers were stable and that the warming protocol applied had been appropriate. The medical officer, a compact physician named Turv, looked at my rig of standard packs layered with backing material and said, in a tone that was not quite surprised, "You improvised a Velshoran gradient pack." "I used what was in the kit closet," I said. "We have one certified unit in the entire station's inventory," he said. "It's in the upper medical bay. Nobody thought to check it against the passenger manifest." "I read the brief instead," I said. He looked at me the way people sometimes look at me, as though the thing I have just said is either very simple or very complicated, and he cannot determine which. 6 hours of sustained manual thermal contact, he said, for 4 patients. The brief specified the interval, I said. He nodded slowly and let me go. I filed my full incident report, went to my quarters, and slept for 9 hours. The Velshoran Cultural Liaison arrived on the 14:00 freight shuttle 3 days later. His name was Kale Sorn, and he had traveled from the nearest Velshoran consular station, which was a 14-hour transit from Way Station 14. He came directly to my office. He was a tall man, gray-blue skin, silver at his temples, dressed in what I recognized from the species brief as formal consular attire, a dark robe with a narrow copper trim at the cuffs. He carried a document case. He sat down across from me without being invited to, which I noted was either rudeness or formality, and I waited to find out which. "Kale Vren," he said. "SAR Coordinator, Grade 4, Way Station 14, 19 years of active service. 3 prior commendations for extraction under non-standard conditions." "That's correct," I said. "I need to ask you some questions about the events of 3 nights ago," he said. "And then I need to give you some information. I would like to do both of those things in order if you're willing." "Go ahead," I said. He asked me about the sequence of events in detail. I told him. He did not interrupt. He asked about the species brief. Had I read it in full when and how long before I descended? I told him. He asked about the thermal protocol I had applied and whether I had applied it to all 4 women and in what sequence. I told him. He asked whether I had had any prior professional training in Velshoran physiological emergency response. "No," I said. "I read the brief." He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his document case. "Mr. Vren," he said, "I need to explain something to you that the species brief references in a footnote near the end of its 14th page." I remembered the footnote. "Document 7 VKS, I said. I made a note to read it. "I haven't gotten to it yet." He placed a document on my desk. It was printed on heavy Velshoran consular paper, which has a faint texture and a slight weight that distinguishes it from standard compact document stock. I looked at it. It was in Velshoran script, which I cannot read, with a standard translation attached on a second sheet. In Velshoran Civil Code, he said, there exists a designation called the Velshoran Bond of Sustained Life. It is old law, older than the compact by several centuries. It was written at a time when Velshoran communities were small and frequently isolated, and when the survival of a group sometimes depended on an outsider who happened to be present during a crisis. I looked at the standard translation. I read the first 2 paragraphs. I set the document down. The designation activates, Kalesorn continued, when a non-Velshoran individual provides sustained physical life support to 4 or more Velshoran adults in a single emergency event. The support must meet a threshold of direct physical contact maintained for the interval prescribed by Velshoran Physiological Emergency Protocol. You met that threshold for all 4 women. I see, I said. The designation is legal in nature, he said. It creates a bond of mutual obligation under Velshoran civil law, the word in standard that comes closest, and it is not a very close translation, is bonded. The 4 women are legally bonded to you, and you to them, under the designation. I sat with that for a moment. I would like to note, I said, that I was unaware of this law. I know, he said. The brief's footnote is inadequate. I have submitted a formal complaint to the Compact database team about that. The footnote should be a full page, not a sentence and a half. I agree, I said. The women are aware of the designation, he said. They have been aware of it since the event. Velshoran women know the law. It is not obscure to them. It is part of their civil education. They knew, from the moment you began the thermal protocol, what it would mean when you finished. I thought about Rael watching me write my incident log and saying there will not be a next time, not like this. I thought about Davin at the back of the hold, holding the warm air for the others. What does the designation require of me? I said. Kalesorn folded his hands on the desk. That is a longer conversation, he said, and the women have asked to be part of it. They came to the station's meeting room that afternoon, Rael, Sarit, Kethael, and Davin. The children were with the medical annex team for a follow-up assessment. It was the first time I had seen any of them upright and in daylight. The stairwell had been emergency lit, and I had been focused on readings and intervals, not on faces. Rael sat directly across from me. She had the posture of someone who was accustomed to being the person a room organized around, and who was currently choosing not to exercise that. Sarit sat at her right and was watching me with the careful attention of someone taking notes. Kethael had the infant Ren in her arms, awake now, looking at the ceiling with the focused interest of a very small person who has decided the world is worth examining. Davin sat at the end of the table, and she looked at me when I sat down and held the look steadily, which was a quality I had noticed about her in the stairwell and had since considered. I have been told about the bond designation, I said. I want to be straightforward with you. I didn't know about the law. I read 14 pages and missed the footnote on the last one. If I had read document 7 VKS before I went downstairs, I paused. I would have gone downstairs anyway. But I want you to know I wasn't operating with full information. Rael was quiet for a moment. We know, she said. That is partly why we are here. To tell me it's void because I didn't know, I said. No, she said. The designation does not require intent. It requires action. You acted. The bond is valid. Then to explain what it requires. Yes, she said, and to ask you something. I waited. Rael looked at the others for a moment, not for permission, I thought, but in the way of someone who is confirming that they are all beginning together. Then she looked back at me. The Velshoran bond of sustained life is old law, she said, but it was not written carelessly. What it requires in plain terms is this: we are obligated to you. Your welfare becomes our concern under civil code, your shelter, your needs, your safety, to the extent our capacity allows. That obligation runs in our direction toward you, and it is not conditional. You saved our lives. The law names that. It does not ask us whether we would choose it. And in my direction, I said. The law is not symmetric, she said. You are bonded to us in the sense that you are recognized formally by our civil code, by our consular records, by the community we come from. You are named. That is not a small thing in Velshoran culture. But the law does not compel you to obligation the way it compels us. You did not choose to enter Velshoran civil space. The designation activates on your side through action, not through choice. So I'm on record as bonded to 4 women I met in a flooded stairwell, I said, and you are obligated to my welfare under your civil law. And I am recognized but not compelled. Essentially, she said. I thought about this. What did you want to ask me? Davin spoke then, for the first time since we had sat down. Her voice was quieter than Rael's and more direct. Whether you intend to contest the designation, she said. Under compact law, a non-Velshoran citizen can petition for exemption on grounds of cultural non-consent. The petition window is 14 days. Kaelsorn can file the documentation if you wish. I looked at her. She was looking back at me with the same steadiness she'd had at the back of the hold, the quality of someone who has already decided what they will accept and is waiting to find out what the answer is. Do you want me to contest it? I said. She did not answer immediately. None of them did. We want you to know you have the option, Rael said. That's not what I asked, I said. Another pause. Then Sarit, who had been watching quietly since the start, said something in Velshoran. It was brief and level. Rael listened to it, then looked back at me. She says that is a fair question, Rael said, and that an honest answer to a fair question deserves the same. No, we do not want you to contest it. I looked at all 4 of them, Rael with her careful steadiness, Sarit with her precise attention, Kethael, who was patting Ren's back absently with one hand and watching me with an expression I was beginning to understand as the particular focus she gave to things that mattered. Davin, still holding my gaze. Then I won't, I said. The room was quiet for a moment. It was not an uncomfortable quiet. I should tell you, I said, that I am a SAR coordinator at a way station on the outer compact boundary. I am not a person with standing or resources. I have a small quarters allocation, a 19-year case log, and a kit closet with inadequate Velshoran thermal equipment. We know what you are, Rael said. We were in the stairwell for 6 hours. I'm saying that the bond, if it means obligation toward my welfare, there is not a great deal of welfare to be obligated toward. Davin said quietly, You read the brief. Yes, I said. All 14 pages, before you came down. That's standard practice for me, I said. I read what's relevant before I go in. In 19 years of SAR work, she said, how many responders have read the Velshoran brief in full before an emergency response involving our people? I thought about the medical officer's expression when he looked at my improvised gradient pack. I thought about the number of times I had pulled a species brief from the database and found the access log showing only 1 prior read, sometimes 2, sometimes none. I don't know the number, I said, but I suspect it's small. It is 1, Davin said. In the records Kaelsorn has access to, for this station and the 6 nearest hubs, the number of non-Velshoran SAR responders who access the full Velshoran emergency physiological brief before an event involving our people is 1. You. 3 nights ago. I didn't have anything to say to that. You read the brief, she said again, because that is what you do. Not because we were Velshoran, not because you knew the law, because there were people in a flooded sublevel and you do not go into a situation without the correct information first. That's correct, I said. That is the thing the bond designates, she said. Not the warmth, not the rescue, the reading of the brief. I sat with that for a long moment. I should still read document 7VKS, I said. Sarit made a sound that I had not expected from her. A short, precise exhale through the nose that was, I was nearly certain, the Velshoran equivalent of a laugh controlled into something more decorous than a laugh. Kethal's mouth moved in what was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. Davin's expression shifted for the first time since I had met her. Something in it opened slightly, like a door moving a centimeter on a hinge. Rael said, Kalesorn has a copy. I'll read it tonight, I said. I read document 7VKS that night. It was 31 pages. I read all of them. The legal architecture of the Velsoran bond of sustained life is, as Rael had described, not symmetric. The bond creates a structured web of obligation running from the bonded women toward the designated individual obligations of welfare, of recognition, of material support where relevant, of formal standing within their community and house designations. The designated individual receives standing, recognition, and what the document calls in standard the weight of being named. The formal acknowledgement by a community that a specific person chose to be present and chose to act, and that this will be remembered and honored. The document was careful about what the bond was not. It was not a marriage contract in the compact sense. It was not a dependency arrangement. It was not a claim on the designated individual's time or movement or choices. It was, the document said in its most precise passage, a formal statement by a community that they have seen what a person did, and they do not intend to let it disappear into an incident report. I set the document down when I finished it and looked at my own incident report, which was open on my terminal. The event summary read, 03-14 alarm, sublevel B flooding, 8 Velshoran passengers recovered, all stable by 0928. Thermal protocol applied per species brief. No casualties. Maintenance fault logged for priority repair. 240 words. The document said the bond would not let it disappear into an incident report. I thought about what Davin had said. You read the brief. That is the thing the bond designates, not the warmth, the reading of the brief. I thought about 19 years of reading briefs that nobody else had read yet, and going into situations with the right information, and writing reports that were accurate and complete, and filing them into a database that 7 people access per year. I thought about the maintenance fault that had been flagged twice and rescheduled twice, and might have been flagged a third time, and rescheduled a third time if the shelf melt rate had been slightly lower that week. I thought about Sol holding the back of my neck in the cold water. I thought about Dav watching me work from against the stairwell wall with the expression of a child who was filing everything for later use. I thought about Ren, asleep in Kethal's arms, having slept through a crisis because the crisis had been managed before it reached her. I saved the incident report. I opened a new document and began writing the full technical brief for a Velshoran physiological emergency response protocol to be added to the Waystation 14 standard SAR kit inventory. If the document existed and was in the kit before an event, the next responder would not have to read 14 pages at 03:14 in the morning before going downstairs. They would already know. The certified thermal unit would be in the sublevel B kit closet, not the upper medical bay. The access log on the species brief would show more than one prior read. I wrote it in 4 hours. I filed it to the station director's office with a recommended urgency classification of Tier 1. Then I went to bed. Kalesorn's shuttle was at 0800. I came to the freight dock to see him off, which was a thing I did not usually do but seemed appropriate. He stopped at the dock entrance and looked at me. Have you read 7VKS? All 31 pages, I said, last night. And I have some questions about the standing implications under compact jurisdictional overlap, I said. Specifically Section 14, which I think may create a conflict with my current compact employment designation. He regarded me for a moment. You read Section 14. I read all of them, I said. I had questions about Section 14. He opened his document case and took out a card. The consular legal office handles those questions, he said. They have seen this issue before. There are resolution procedures. Thank you, I said. He started to go, then stopped. Mr. Vren, the 4 women, they will be in transit for another 6 days before their connection departs. They are berthed in the upper passenger hold now, which is functioning correctly. I know, I said. I checked the hold status report this morning. I thought you might, he said. He looked at me one more time. You are a strange man to have this happen to. I read the brief, I said. He made a sound that might have been the consular formality version of what Sarit had done in the meeting room. Then he went up the boarding ramp. The 6 days were not what I expected, though I am not entirely sure what I had expected. I worked my shifts. I filed my reports. I checked the sublevel B repair progress twice daily and noted it in the maintenance follow-up log. I ate in the station canteen at the usual time. These things did not change. What changed was that at the second meal of each day, 1 or 2 or sometimes all 4 of them were in the canteen at the same time as me. This was a way station, and the canteen was not large. We sat at the same table, which was the practical arrangement. They told me their names in full. Velshoran full names are layered in a way that standard abbreviates, and learning to say them correctly took me the better part of 2 evenings, which Sarit found either impressive or amusing, and I could not tell which because her face made the same expression for both. Dav asked me about SAR work on the second evening. He was precise and sequential in how he asked questions. He finished each answer before asking the next one, which is rarer in a 6-year-old than you might think. And by the end of the conversation he had assembled, from my answers, a reasonably accurate outline of what a way station SAR coordinator does and why. He asked whether SAR work was dangerous. I told him that the dangerous part was usually the part where you did not have enough information before going in, which was why reading the brief mattered more than almost anything else in the kit. He wrote that down. He wrote some of it down in a notebook he carried, which Kethael told me was a thing he did with information he intended to keep. Vel spent most of the second and third days with Ren, who had become reliably interested in Vel as a specific source of entertainment, and would track her movements around the table with the focused attention of an infant who has identified her favorite person. Vel accepted this with the slightly burdened dignity of a 5-year-old who is flattered, but also needs to eat her meal. Sol found me at my desk on the 3rd afternoon. I don't know how she knew which office was mine. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then came in and put a folded piece of paper on my desk and left without saying anything. I unfolded it when she was gone. It was a drawing of the stairwell, rendered with the specific observational accuracy of a 3-year-old who is looking at something and putting down what she sees rather than what she thinks it should look like. There was a tall figure and a small figure and water at the bottom and a light at the top. The tall figure had large hands. I put it in my desk drawer. Rael and I talked, mostly in the evenings after the children were down, about the bond's practical implications. She was methodical about it. She treated the conversation the way I treat an incident debrief, which is to say, she moved through the relevant sections in order and confirmed understanding at each point before proceeding. It was an efficient way to have a complicated conversation. I told her so, and she said, "I noticed you work the same way." And I said that I had noticed the same thing about her, and she said that the document was not wrong about the weight of being named, and I said I had thought the same when I read Section 7. She asked me on the 3rd evening whether the bond was a burden. I considered the question seriously before I answered, because it deserved that. "It's a change in the record," I said. "I've spent 19 years building a record." A change to it isn't automatically unwelcome. That is a careful answer, she said. I'm a careful person, I said. I know, she said. We all know that is the point. On the fourth evening, she told me something about the Velshoran house system that was not in 7VKS, not classified, simply contextual, the kind of information that documents don't carry because it requires a person who lived in it to explain it. The bond, she said, did not only designate me in the abstract. It entered my name into their house records. Their community would know, from the consular notation, what had happened in sublevel B of Waystation 14 and who had been there. That record would persist. Their children would know it. In the accounting that Velshoran communities kept of what they owed and to whom, my name would be in the column that did not get balanced, because there are things that cannot be balanced, and the Velshoran Civil Code was old enough to know that and to say so plainly. I thought about that for a while. The protocol brief I filed, I said, goes into the station record and the cluster distribution. If it becomes standard kit inventory, it changes what responders have available before they go in. A future event with Velshoran passengers gets handled differently because of the brief. Yes, she said. That's not the same kind of record, I said, but it's the same principle. It is exactly the same principle, she said. You understand why the bond names it. We stayed at the table a while after that without talking, which was its own kind of conversation. Davin came to my office on the fifth day with the station map open on a tablet. She wanted to understand the sublevel B access layout, specifically why the north stairwell had stayed dry when the south access had flooded, which was a function of the gradient differential in the station's northwest quadrant. I explained it. She asked 3 follow-up questions, each more specific than the last, and by the end of the conversation, she had mapped the flaw in the station's drainage design that had allowed the melt water to reach the coolant seal in the first place, rather than routing to the collection tank. Your maintenance reports flagged the seal, she said. Yes, I said. And the fault was in the drainage routing, upstream from the seal, she said. So the seal repair alone would not prevent a recurrence. That's correct, I said. I noted it in the Tier 1 brief I filed to the station director. She looked at me. Did you note it in those words? I pulled up the brief on my terminal and showed her the relevant section. She read it. She said something in Velshoran under her breath that I did not understand, but that had the cadence of someone reading a sentence and finding it exactly correct. The station director has not replied to your brief, she said. Not yet, I said. How long does he usually take? It varies, I said. Tier 1 classification requires a response within 72 hours. You filed it 4 days ago. Yes, I said. She looked at me steadily. I would like to help you follow up on it, she said. Kaelsorn's consular office has a formal liaison channel with Compact Waystation Administration, a joint technical notation from a Velshoran consular assessor, and a SAR coordinator would carry different weight than the SAR coordinator's brief alone. I thought about the maintenance fault flagged twice and rescheduled twice. I thought about 31 centimeters of cold water and 8 people who had needed someone to read 14 pages at 03:14 in the morning. I would appreciate that, I said. She opened the station map again. Walk me through the drainage routing, she said. From the northwest shelf anchor. I walked her through it. She asked questions that were the right questions. We worked for 2 hours and produced a joint technical notation that was, I thought, more complete than my brief had been, not because the brief had been wrong, but because she saw the engineering from a different angle, and the combination was better than either alone. I filed it the next morning with her countersignature in the Velshoran consular format attached. The station director replied within 4 hours with a priority repair authorization. The repair crew was already in sublevel B when their shuttle departed. I was at the freight dock for that departure too. The children went up the ramp in order. Dav, carrying his notebook. Vel, carrying Ren on her hip with the burdened dignity of someone who has accepted the role. Sol last, who stopped at the top of the ramp and looked back at me for a moment before going in. The four women said goodbye in sequence. Sarek gave me a formal Velshoran acknowledgement that Kalesorn had told me was used between people of equivalent standing, a thing I understood now that I had read 7 VKS. Kethale said, in standard, that the bond's welfare obligations would be transmitted to me through the consular office in the standard annual form, and that if I had questions about the schedule, I should contact the legal office whose card Kalesorn had given me, and that Ren had slept well every night since the stairwell. Rael said that the drainage repair was correct, and that the joint notation would be attached to the consular record of the event as a formal annotation, and that the weight of being named would not be a light weight to carry, and she did not believe I had ever carried light things. Davin was last. She stood at the bottom of the ramp for a moment. "You'll file the protocol brief," she said. It was not a question. "It's already filed," I said. "Station-wide distribution. I sent a copy to the 5 nearest hubs as well, with the recommended kit inventory update." She looked at me. The door behind her was open and the shuttle corridor was lit, and she was standing in the space between the dock and the ramp with the station at her back. "When the next person goes down a stairwell," she said, "they will have already read it." "That's the intent," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The bond is not a small thing. I want you to understand that it is not a small thing to us." "I've read 7 VKS," I said. "I understand." "You will feel it later," she said. "It takes time. These things always take time." I thought about Sol's drawing in my desk drawer. I thought about Dav's notebook. I thought about Ren sleeping because the crisis had been managed before it reached her. I thought about the drain routing, corrected now, so that the next melt season would route to the collection tank and not to the coolant seal, and the next passenger group in sublevel B would not need anyone to come down a stairwell at 03:14 reading a species brief by phone light in cold water. "You should go," I said. "The shuttle window is in 4 minutes." She went up the ramp. I stood at the dock until the shuttle cleared the station and the dock doors closed, and then I went back to my office and opened the next case log in the queue. There was a notation attached to the top of the file from the station director. He had seen the joint technical brief, approved the repair, and added a commendation to my personnel record. He had also, I noticed, flagged the Velshoran physiological protocol brief for distribution to the 3-station cluster, of which Waystation 14 was a part. I noted the commendation. I noted the distribution. I opened the case log. Then I pulled Sol's drawing out of the desk drawer and looked at it for a moment. The large-handed figure and the small figure, and the water at the bottom and the light at the top, rendered by a 3-year-old who had held on because she understood that holding on was the correct response to a situation like this. I put it back in the drawer. I read the next case log. I read all of it. Then I began writing.